When you play the Game of Thrones,
Subscribe and like.
you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. Now, this is my reread channel, so if this is your first time watching this video or even stumbling upon me, I hope you enjoy your stay, for one, and two, this is a series I've been doing for A Clash of Kings. I will eventually have all of my reread videos ported over to this channel, but we're not there yet, so we're kind of coming in on Arya 5. And what I love about Arya's plotline, even though we get a ton of it, right? We've already gotten 5 chapters for her in the first 20 of the book. She is a very prominent character within this book specifically. This is kind of the next part of that journey, right? So the first 4 chapters are a lot about Arya being with Yoren. And whereas, yes, the tension is building and all of those things, this is really the first chapter, I would say maybe outside of like Arya 4 and 5 of A Game of Thrones, where Arya now is having to make her own decisions, trying to survive. She can't rely upon Yoren now, right? Yoren is dead. And so she has to now guide these people, or at least help, get them to a place of safety and trying to get home. This kind of starts that arc now, where she goes from her Harrenhal arc and then to a Storm of Swords with the Brotherhood, and her now trying to make her own decisions. And it also goes to her amount of trust that she has for people, as we'll see how she kind of thinks about Yoren and how, in a lot of ways, I guess he failed her, but I don't think it's fair to say that about Yoren, but that's what Arya has to struggle with. And so I really like the way that this chapter reconstructs where Arya is going in the next portion of the book. And one thing I will say about this chapter is this chapter was basically completely omitted from the television show, and it is a shame. I mean, they do take parts of it. They really combine Arya 4 and Arya 5 into one plot point in the show, and I understand why they do that. But man, there's a lot of good stuff here in this chapter that really foreshadows some things for Arya going in the future, and are some nice payoffs to the early part of the book and also book 1. So let's not waste any time, and let's get into page 219 of Arya 5, A Clash of Kings. Arya climbs to the highest branch and sees chimneys, thatched roofs, a stream, and a wooden pier by a long building with a slate roof. She moves farther out on the branch, noticing smoke from chimneys and a wagon behind a stable, confirming someone is there. So the big thing that Arya is kind of realizing here is, as they've been on the run and after they left the holdfast they were at in the previous chapter, all of these villages have been deserted. There have not been any living signs of people like when they came to that holdfast with Yoren. And so she's really confused, because if you're looking at this and you're going, wait, why is this village have people living here, right? And so instantly in your mind, you got to be thinking, okay, this has to be, Lannister soldier camp, or maybe it's possibly, you could think it's maybe the River Lords, maybe having a camp here, some reason that they have protection from the raids that have been going on right now. And that's what Arya is kind of trying to figure out at this point. Gendry had remarked that the Lannisters would have burned the lake if they could, and Arya knew he was right. Again, we talked about this really throughout all of Arya's plotline, is they care more about the terror aspect than really looting and things like that. It's more about striking fear into anyone that's loyal to the River Lords, or I guess the King of the North, we should say at this point, and Robb Stark. This is what's going to happen to you. On the night of their escape, the flames of the burning town reflected off the lake, making it seem as if the water was on fire. When they returned to the ruins the next night, they found only blackened stones, burned out houses, and corpses with smoke still rising from the ashes. Again, they didn't leave anything behind, right? Amory Lorch put this holdfast to the sword, more or less. He burned it all. He wants nothing left here. He doesn't want people camping in here so that he has to root them out later. And so it kind of tells you what the Lannisters are trying to do at this point. Or I guess I should say the Lannister bannermen, or soldiers, I should say. Hot Pie had begged them not to return, while Lamy called them fools and warned that Sir Amory Lorch would catch and kill them, but the soldiers had already left. Yeah, it's kind of one of those things where if you're Lamy, I mean, maybe you're thinking, okay, well, what if they're still lingering by? But I think any person that's kind of rational and maybe sees the situation for what it is would go, these are soldiers trying to attack and destroy as many places as they can. They're not going to stay in this holdfast that was not defensible that well, right? You think about how easy Arya's party got snuck up on, and even how they were able to get through these kind of unmortared walls and very loosely defended gate. If these are highly equipped Lannister soldiers, or sellswords, or whatever, they're going to have better places to stay than in some abandoned holdfast. But that gets us into page 220. It also turns to a bit about how Lamy is as a person, right? Lamy is somebody that really wants to yield. He's more of a cowardly type, which I guess you can understand given the fact that these are boys. Well, at least Lamy, Hot Pie, Gendry are. These are young adults, I should say, maybe. I don't know. I'm just going to say they're children. But what are they going to do fighting against grown men with full armor and things like that? So you understand it, albeit it's not the best course of action. They'd found the gates broken, the walls partly destroyed, and unburied corpses strewn inside. Gendry immediately concluded that everyone had been killed, noting that dogs or wolves had scavenged the bodies. Yeah, they're not leaving anybody behind. You can tell just by the state of the castle. These people were not taking prisoners. Arya refused to leave until they found Yoren, believing he was too tough to be dead. Yoren was really Arya's last hope, the last chance of safety, of feeling security, and now she's kind of been left to fend for herself with Gendry and her small party. They found Yoren's body with his skull split open by an axe, his familiar beard and faded black Night's Watch cloak confirming his identity. Aemry Lorch had left both his own dead and murdered Night's Watch recruits unburied, with 4 Lannister soldiers piled near Yoren. Shows that Yoren went out with a bang, but also just tells you like how much Aemry Lorch just does not really care even about his own men, not burying them, going to other places to raid in the night. Really kind of shows you a bit of the morality going on right now. Arya struggled with grief and anger, insisting on burying Yoren, remembering his promise to take her to Winterfell. What I think is interesting, we see that in book 1, she also like kicks, or she gets upset at the first, kid that she kills in the stables when she's trying to leave King's Landing. She kind of has the same feeling here where, she's kind of angry, right? Yoren, lied to her, right? That's how she kind of interprets it, that he said he was going to take her home, and here he is, dead. And they're nowhere closer to home than they were really, a couple days before. And so that's something that's going to really play into Arya's mind. And Arya, is going to struggle with that. Gendry suggested checking the tower house where Yoren had sent 3 men to hold out. The men had survived by pulling up the ladder and withstanding an attempted fire attack as the stone tower did not burn. They decided to press north rather than turn back, giving Arya hope she might still reach Winterfell. If you're at this point, I guess it's almost the sunk cost fallacy. Like, you've already invested so much time into getting this far north. Going south isn't much better. I mean, you're still going to be in danger. If anything, you think that, there's a chance that if we can make it far enough north, there isn't any fighting going on right now. If you can get, past really the Triton, if you can get up to maybe, the Twins or where Roose Bolton and his men are stationed, like there's not much fighting going on beyond that point. And so that's what you're kind of thinking about if you're Arya. And if you're Arya, the further north you get, the better chance you have of running into maybe a bannerman of Robb or something like that, or running into, her uncle in Edmure. It's a lot better chances the further they get north. The issue with that is the further they go north, they also run into the most conflicted area pretty much on the map right now, the heart of the Riverlands. So tough position you're in if you are Arya and co. Kind of going back to the present now, a lot of that was kind of a flashback, something that George loves to do with the character of Daenerys, especially in book 1. Arya goes back to observing the village from the tree. She considered the risk of approaching, wondering if Sir Aemry Lorch might be there. She watched carefully for signs of life, glimpsing movement, but unable to be certain of what she saw. A clear horse's whinny reached her ears, adding to her uncertainty. Crows filled the sky, circling over the thatched roofs, while to the east, the God's Eye shimmered under the sun. Arya can't tell exactly what's going on in this village, but she does see, life. She hears horses. She can notice smoke going up. There is people here, but are they friendly or are they enemies? As that gets us into page 221. As they traveled along the muddy shore, avoiding roads for safety, Arya often felt drawn to the lake, yearning to swim and feel clean again. And remember, Arya hasn't actually, cleaned herself since really, a long time ago. When you really think about it, even in King's Landing, she wasn't bathing or cleaning herself either. The last time she would have cleaned herself would have probably been before Ned's death. So, yeah, you can imagine wanting to go and actually get yourself clean. I am somebody that I would say maybe not when I was younger, I really regret, I think, the way I took care of myself when I was younger. Not just like I'm talking about like cleaning and stuff like that, but just in general, I think I didn't take things that seriously, which I think is common for you when you're younger. Of course, you don't take things seriously, but for me, I do regret a lot of those things, like just hygiene wise, and it's something that I could not imagine. I cannot imagine like not being able to take a shower, not being able to take, I don't know, a bath, whatever, for like at least 2 weeks or more. Like that's crazy to me. She couldn't bring herself to undress in front of the others, so she settled for dipping her feet in the cool water at the end of the day. I also want to give her a reminder, because I didn't really explain this. The reason she hasn't been bathing is not because they haven't had access to that. It's because, again, she's trying to hide that she is a girl. And so we're thinking about, even in past chapters, I believe it's Arya 3, where she actually has the opportunity to bathe. Like, all the men are trying to get a bath, but she doesn't specifically, and it kind of comes off as really weird if you're one of the other boys. But yeah, that's kind of why. She's having to hide that fact. She had thrown away her ruined shoes, and though walking barefoot was painful at first, her feet toughened up until she enjoyed the feeling of earth beneath her. It's kind of weird because this chapter really reminds me of Daenerys early on, when she's kind of trying to integrate into Dothraki culture. It's really Arya now becoming even more of, people that are desperate right now, that don't, being forced to flee their homes, not having a lot of luxuries. Up until now, I mean, again, Arya 5 is not that, but with Yoren, there was a sense of you were well fed, at least. You had certain, things that you could look forward to that maybe other people wouldn't be able to. Here, she has almost nothing. She doesn't even have shoes. So it's a bit of a different, arc now for Arya. Arya spotted a small wooded island and 3 black swans gliding serenely over the water, indifferent to the war. Again, animals don't really know what's going on. They might be scared of humans and things like that, but they don't realize the brutality of what's happening. She envied them, but also imagined eating one. Again, it's what hunger does to you, desperation. Whereas these creatures may be beautiful to look at, you still want to eat them because you're hungry. It's self-preservation. I think one of the things that Tolkien does the best in his writing, especially with, I would say, the character of Saruman and Isengard specifically, is kind of what war does to the environment and things like that. It kind of reminded me of that when I was reading this chapter. And I think George also does write about that quite a lot. You even think about when we're going to get to Storm's End and Stannis is taking out trees that have probably been there for a long time. George also writes about it. It's just not a main focus as much as it is for somebody like Tolkien in his writing, but I did want to bring that up as well. Arya thinks the hunger was constant, and they survived on only water, acorns, and whatever they could scavenge, and lately it had been bugs, which were easy to find, and Arya had grown used to them, unlike Hot Pie, who vomited after trying to eat a beetle. This is something I find very fascinating to me, because I've always watched those, those YouTube videos where it's like, oh, you've got to eat this thing or whatever. And I never know how I would do in those, because I feel like I could force myself to like eat like a beetle or something like that. But then at the same time, I don't know. Like I don't know if I'd be able to force it down. So like I can't really judge Hot Pie for not being able to eat these like bugs, especially when it's like they are literally straight out of the ground. Like it's not like they've been like cooked at all or anything like that. Like you're just straight eating it out of the mud. Like, kind of a tough one, but it's kind of how Arya is. She's very resourceful. Gendry had caught a frog, Hot Pie had once found blackberries, and Kurz had taught them to make acorn paste, which tasted terrible. Yeah, acorn paste doesn't sound very appealing. And the other part of it that you're running into is like, you have to recognize what berries and plants and things like that you can actually eat, which a lot of these people probably don't have a lot of skill to do. Kurz the poacher had been their most knowledgeable guide in the woods, but he was wounded by an arrow while pulling up the ladder at the tower house. Tarber had tried to treat him with mud and moss, but his conditions worsened as red welts spread across his body. Within days, he was too weak to rise, and soon he was dead. And this is something that Gendry and Arya will kind of discuss a bit further on, but, healthcare. Think about the healthcare that you have in Westeros. Outside of, like, maesters, there's not a lot of healers in Westeros. And so getting proper healthcare, if you're, somebody that is just a common born person, it's very difficult. Very simple things like infection or just taking an injury that maybe, if you think about our modern healthcare, wouldn't be such a big deal. Like maybe you would have a scar and things like that, but it wouldn't kill you necessarily. those minor things could easily kill you in this world. And I think that's something that I think gets kind of swept under the rug. It's something that I think that even when we look back on history now, we don't fully realize. They buried curs under a mound of stones, after which Cut Jack took his sword and hunting horn, while Tarber took his bow, boots, and knife. Cut Jack and Tarber later disappeared, and at first the group thought they had gone hunting. They waited for the return, but when it became clear they weren't coming back, Gendry urged them to move on. Now, Arya is going to talk about the rationale, and I think that this is interesting because what would you do in this situation? I think it's easy to judge and go, oh, they shouldn't have left Arya and co behind, but you're thinking about the horrors that's going on. You've just watched as basically your entire company from King's Landing was killed in the night, right? And you had no chance. And so when you think about that and you put this into context, what is Arya's group good for right now? Like, they can't really, feed themselves. Arya's probably a good scout. Gendry could be useful in the fight, but the others at this point are not the most helpful. It's one of those things where, okay, if we go off as a pair, we have a better chance of surviving. If we make one kill, like this, say, killing a frog, killing a rabbit, killing whatever, that's going to be able to feed the two of us much more than it would be, say, 6 or 7 people. Right now, instead of having one rabbit, you're going to need like 4, right, to have a decent meal. And so you put that all together, I think it's hard to judge them leaving, right? So I don't know. Let me know what your thoughts are on that. Like, and especially when you think about Cut Jack and Tarber do not seem to be all that close to Arya and her party. Again, there's a bit of an age difference. And also you think about these people have only known each other for a couple of weeks. It's not like you're leaving your best friend or anything like that. So I do find this very interesting about kind of how Arya thinks about this. As we get into page 222, Arya resented Tarber and Cut Jack for abandoning them, even if they stood a better chance on their own. Like, Arya, as a survivor herself, understands why they did it, but that doesn't make it any less easy to accept. Hot Pie used a barking sound to signal, following Kerr's poacher trick, though he was terrible at animal calls. Yeah, animal calls are great if you know how to do them, but if you don't know how to mimic an animal, you're just going to make yourself even more exposed than you would just in general, because people are going to be like, oh, that's just really weird. Let's check that out. But whatever. Hot Pie's trying. Arya moves swiftly through the tree branches, balancing like a water dancer before dropping to the ground and rolling on her landing. Gendry helped her up and asked what she had seen. She reported a fishing village north along the shore with 26 thatched roofs, 1 slate roof, and signs of life. Again, confirming what we'd already kind of known with Arya. But Weasel, the little girl Lami had nicknamed, emerged from the bushes and clung to Arya's leg, her mouth filthy from eating dirt again. Desperation. That's all I can say here. I mean, this is just pure desperation. People aren't being fed. Arya is kind of viewed as kind of the leader. Like with Gendry, those two are the leaders of the party right now. Gendry asked if she had seen people, but Arya had only seen smoking chimneys and heard a horse. Hot Pie, too loud as always, hoped the villagers might give them food, while Gendry warned they might kill them instead. Again, it's hard to judge Hot Pie because when you're driven by so much desperation, you haven't eaten a decent meal in a good amount of time now, you want that to be true, right? It's kind of like Sansa, right? She wants things to be true in King's Landing, especially about like Dantos, but they're not true. Things aren't going to happen the way Hot Pie wants it. If this town or village has been left there, it's because the Lannisters have allowed it, right? Or that they're there in general. And you think about all these other people that are starving and fleeing and aren't able to feed themselves. What makes you think these people are going to feed you? It's just that naivety that Hot Pie, being so young, still kind of has. And Gendry, again, molded by his experiences, realizes what probably they should be realizing. Hot Pie suggested they could yield, which made Gendry compare him to Lami. Lami was too weak to walk after being speared in the calf, sat propped against a tree, needing to be carried in a makeshift litter. That's another thing. If you go back to Tarber and Cut Jack, you also have somebody that's injured and is likely going to die soon that's slowing you down, right? It's just another element to that I don't really fully blame them for leaving. But at the same time, when we think about this yielding idea, what would that have accomplished? right? It doesn't accomplish anything. If they had yielded to Lorch, they still would have been killed. Now, maybe that's hindsight, but at this point, they're still thinking they should have yielded. They would have died. That made no difference. At least they went out, in a fight. Just wouldn't have mattered. And that's kind of the same thing here. If they go up yielding to some random village, who knows who these men are to begin with? They could easily, kill you or take you prisoner, which is what ends up happening. But still, just kind of dumb. Again, it's just naivety that you can get out of this. He insisted they should yield, claiming Yoren should have surrendered instead of resisting. And again, I talked about that's kind of stupid, but that gets us into page 223. Arya was tired of Lami constantly complaining about how Yoren should have yielded, along with his whining about his leg and hunger. Hot Pie agreed, believing that if Yoren had surrendered in the king's name, they would have been spared. Not the truth at all. Also, Lami is dying, so you kind of gotta give him a little bit of a pass when it comes to complaining. Gendry disagreed, explaining that lords and knights took each other captive for ransom, but didn't care if commoners yielded. And that's the truth, right? It's the whole idea that the High Lords, they play their Game of Thrones, and the small folk suffer. Hot Pie remained focused on food, hoping the fishing village would sell them fish since they had no way to catch their own. And again, what are you going to trade for that? How are you going to trade for food? Just got to think a little bit, Hot Pie. Think a little. Arya had tried catching fish by hand, but they were too fast, and the water distorted her vision. She noticed crows near the water, suggesting something dead had washed ashore. We know this is corpses, but Hot Pie thinks, maybe that these could be dead fish or something like that. Gendry, now sporting a thick black beard, refused to allow fires, knowing the danger they pose. Yeah, if you basically do a fire in the middle of the night, it's just a warning sign. Hey, come kill us. Like, that's what it is, right? It's the same idea. I've been rereading the Hunger Games books. The same idea that, like, Katniss thinks about is you light a fire in the middle of the night when people are hunting, you're going to die, or at least be attacked. Hot Pie and Lami continue complaining of hunger, prompting Arya to remind them that they were all starving, not just them. Lami accused Arya of not being as hungry as they were, calling her worm breath. Well, if Arya is not as hungry as they were, that's their fault. Then eat the worms. If you're going to complain, then eat the worms. I don't know what to tell them. I don't know what to tell them. And that's what Arya basically does, taunting him, offering to dig worms for him if he wanted. Lami bragged that if not for his leg, he could hunt boars, which Lami, again, very naive. I mean, Robbie B himself couldn't take on the boars, so I don't think Lami's going to be able to do it. But Arya kind of lets something slip, because she seems to have a great knowledge of how to actually hunt boars, with dogs and horses and weapons, and she lets that slip. She recalls how her father had hunted boars with Robb, Jon, and even Bran, but never her, since hunting wasn't considered proper for ladies. Arya wants to be a tomboy. It's just not the way things are in this world. Hot Pie challenged Arya's knowledge of hunting, but she insisted she knew more than him, which is correct, but if you're Hot Pie, this doesn't make any sense. Arya should be from Fleabottom, very low-born. How would Arya know any of that? Gendry, growing frustrated, told them both to be quiet, but his face pained as he tried to think of their next move. Again, if you're Gendry, you're looking at the situation and you're going, what can I do, right? I mean, I have a bunch of mouths that need to be fed that are useless. We are moving extremely slowly, and there's this village. Now, is there a risk, a pretty huge risk, that we get caught? Yes, but at the same time, we don't take this risk, we may just starve to death anyway. And so that's what would be kind of running through my mind. Lami once again insisted that they should yield, but Arya snapped at him to stop bringing it up since they didn't even know who was in the village. Great point by Arya. Don't know what Lami's thinking. Hot Pie mentioned that Lami used to be a thief in the city, but Arya, with a classic Arya line, says he must not have been a good one if he got caught, which is true. I mean, if you're a thief and you get caught, especially at a young age like Lami is, probably not the best thief. And Arya herself done pretty good at stealing in the past. Gendry decided Evenfall would be the best time to scout, planning to go after dark. Arya insisted she should go instead, calling Gendry too noisy, but he insisted they would both go, which is true. Gendry, and he's even going to wear his like really nice helmet. It's going to weigh a lot. It's going to, get stuck on branches or whatever. He's going to make a lot of noise because he's bigger, whereas Arya is smaller and quicker. When she, steps, it's not going to leave as much noise on the ground. And so Gendry probably shouldn't be going in general, probably should just be Arya, but you get why Gendry wants to go as well, probably tired of sitting back. Lamy supported Arya, saying she was sneakier, but Gendry refused to let her go alone. Lamy worried about being left behind, knowing Hot Pie couldn't carry him, and Hot Pie warned that wolves were nearby since he had heard them howling the night before. I understand Lamy here, right? You've just been left behind, and here you are, splitting up again. And if they don't come back, Lamy is as good as dead. Arya had also heard the wolves while sleeping in a tree, staying awake for an hour after. Hot Pie complained that without a fire, they had no way to keep the wolves away, which is true, right? Either the wolves or the men, one of them is eventually going to get you. Gendry reassured them that they weren't being abandoned, and Lamy had his spear if wolves came. They were just scouting and would return. Lamy whined about his leg and asked for a potion. Again, very naive. People can't even get food, and you think you're going to get a potion for your leg? I know you're on the edge of death, and things aren't looking good. But again, a lot of wishful thinking here. Gendry mockingly promised to bring some if they found any. Gendry then ordered Hot Pie to keep Weasel from following, threatening to kick him if he didn't. Gendry put on his helm and set off, forcing Arya to hurry to keep up with his long strides. He walked in silence, making too much noise as he moved through the trees, but eventually he stopped and admitted that he thought Lamy was going to die, which he is. He has a wound that is not being treated, could easily get infected, that hasn't really been stopped. He's just really weak at this point, and they can't feed him. They can't do anything to fix it, so he's going to die sooner or later. Arya wasn't surprised since Kurz had died from his wound despite being stronger than Lamy, and she had noticed the heat and smell of Lamy's infected leg. Again, it's infected, he has a fever, gonna die soon. So she suggested finding a maester, but Gendry dismissed the idea, knowing that maesters only served in castles and wouldn't waste their skill on someone like Lamy. And this is the truth. Now, we know some maesters would do that, right? If you brought Lamy to Maester Aemon, for instance, he would for sure try to help, the boy. If it was Maester Luwin, maybe the same. But it's, different maesters that are maybe younger, that are a bit more full of themselves. It's how do you even get an audience with a maester to begin with? They only live in castles. You'd have to be admitted somehow to the maester, and that would never happen for the vast majority. And so Gendry is spot on. Again, it's Gendry knowing these things because he lived in King's Landing really his whole life. He knows how these things work. Whereas getting into page 225, Arya has the opposite perspective, right? Arya, she lived in a castle. She grew up with a maester and Luwin, and a very kind maester. She kind of has the opposite of that, right? Because she thinks that he would have helped anyone. But Gendry coldly stated that Lamy was going to die and they would be better off without him. They're basically having the same conversation that you believe the other two men would have had with Tarber and Cutjack. They would have had the same conversation, right? At what point do we leave them behind to try and save ourselves? Not everybody has to die here. And Gendry has even more reason. He was tired of carrying Lamy and listening to him talk about yielding, admitting he would knock Lamy's teeth in if he could stand. He also dismissed Weasel as useless, but Arya defended her, saying she was just scared and hungry, and that's the truth of it, right? Weasel, in probably normal times, if she wasn't on the run, scared for her life, underfed, she'd probably just be a normal person, a normal girl, but because of, the tragic events that have happened to her, she's been completely shocked by war, right? And George kind of puts that into this character for that reason. And it's one of those things where Arya is very empathetic. She is somebody that is unlike Sansa. Sansa is not very empathetic at the very beginning of the story, whereas Arya is the opposite. It's kind of, again, that polar opposite where Arya takes a lot of accountability, whereas Sansa doesn't take much at all. Gendry stubbornly argued that Weasel, Hot Pie, and Lamy were slowing them down and could get them all killed, which is completely true. Again, I think if Tarber had approached it, or Tarber or I guess Cutjack had approached Gendry about leaving them behind, Gendry might have done it if, Arya agreed to it. And that's what I think is interesting. He told Arya she was the only one among them who is actually useful, even if you are a girl. This is that big reveal, right? Somebody figures out that she is a girl, and Arya is kind of caught off by that. Arya denied being a girl, but Gendry wasn't fooled, saying he wasn't as stupid as the others. She argued that the Night's Watch didn't take girls, but Gendry insisted that, yes, that is the truth, but Yoram must have had a reason for bringing her, and he starts to, put all the puzzle pieces together. Why did Arya think the gold cloaks are coming after her? There's some pieces that just don't add up here if you're Gendry, and so you kind of are bringing that to light here. When she continued denying it, he challenged her openly, telling her to pull out her cock and take a piss. But she knew that couldn't happen. Arya snapped back that if she wanted to, she could, but Gendry called her a liar and pointed out that she always went into the woods alone, unlike Hot Pie or him. And he didn't really notice this until they kind of got separated from the Yoren group, because there were so many different men and people. You maybe don't, notice, her sneaking off into the woods. Whereas now, when there's only a couple of you, you very much do notice when somebody leaves your campsite. He teased that if she wasn't a girl, she must be a eunuch, which made Arya angrily call him one instead. Gendry smirked and offered to prove otherwise, but Arya, flustered, quickly changed the subject. She accused him of hiding something too, bringing up the gold cloaks who had been after him at the inn. And yes, they both have secrets of their own, but I would say Gendry's been a lot more open with the two than Arya has been. Gendry admitted he didn't know why they were after him, but suspected that Yoren did. He turned the question to Arya, asking why she thought they had been after her. Arya remembered Yoren's warning that many in the group would have sold her to the queen for a pardon or silver, and would have done much worse. Only Gendry was different. He was wanted too. She seems like she can, again, trust Gendry because, one, they've interacted quite a lot over the beginning chapters of the book, and two, he's also wanted for some reason or another. If Gendry was to return Arya to the capital, well, he's escaping something from the capital as well. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. And so he's kind of willing to tell him the truth. She cautiously suggested they trade secrets, saying she'd tell him if he told her. Getting into page 226, Gendry questioned if Arya was really her name or if she had some other girl's name, forcing Arya to acknowledge the truth. She considered killing him to keep her secret, but knew he was stronger and had his own sword. Instead, she chose to trust him and made him swear not to tell Lami or Hot Pie. She revealed her true name, Arya of House Stark. A lot of things running through Arya's mind. Can she tell Gendry? Should she try and kill him to silence that information so it's not let out? How much can she trust him? And so she decides to trust him, which is the right decision. Gendry realized she was the daughter of Ned Stark, the executed hand of the king, and now understands why that she was truly in danger. Arya explained that Yoren had been taking her home to Winterfell, and Gendry was shocked that she was highborn and would one day be a lady. If you're Gendry, you're going to the Night's Watch, to a life of basically exile. It's not a very pleasant or happy life at all. And the last thing you would expect is for a highborn girl to be traveling with the Night's Watchmen, or I should say Yoren, right? The other are just recruits at this point. They haven't been sworn in or anything like that. Arya, looking at her ragged state, felt she was nothing like her mother or sister, who were true ladies. Arya is very different than both, her mother and her sister, especially her sister. Those two are very, very, very different. Now, I will say one thing about Catelyn and Arya. Catelyn is very strong-willed in a lot of ways, and so is Arya. I think Arya also shares a bit of how Catelyn, in a lot of ways, seems to take a bit more accountability than somebody like Sansa, right? At a lot of times, Catelyn will think about her actions and how if she had done things very differently, maybe her family would still be whole. That's something that Catelyn thinks a lot about, and so maybe that's because of experience and age, and Sansa just hasn't aged all that much yet, but Arya is a bit different. She does take a lot of accountability, and so Arya, I think, has a bit more of her mother in her than she realizes. I just think that she lacks a lot of the negative aspects to the character of Catelyn that makes her so human. He stubbornly insisted on calling her milady out of habit, recalling how his master taught him to treat highborn girls with respect. Arya angrily warned him not to, knowing it would draw attention, and told him to keep acting normal. Arya doesn't like being called a lady in normal times, and she really wouldn't like it here, where people would easily figure it out that Arya's not who she says she is. Gendry, still teasing, responds with, "As my lady commands," making Arya shove him hard. A little bit of this, flirtatious relationship, why so many people think that Gendry and Arya may get together by the end of the story. Dear God, hopefully not like Game of Thrones Season 8, but that is something that did happen. He stumbled and fell, laughing, and she kicked him for good measure, but it only made him laugh more. Frustrated, she declared she was going to check the village and took off, forcing Gendry to hurry after her. As they moved, she caught a scent in the air and asked if he smelled it too. This was the quote-unquote rotten fish that was brought up earlier. It's not going to be rotten fish. Getting to page 227, Arya and Gendry investigate this smell, which is not a rotten fish at all. But Gendry and Arya decide to split up, with him going to the west to find a road and Arya taking the shoreline. He tells her to bark like a dog if she needs help, but Arya prefers shouting for help instead. Yeah, if you get into a situation where you need help, barking's not going to help you, because either one, again, you're going into a village where there are a lot of dogs, so at any point, if your call is as good as like a dog's, you might not even realize that they're calling for help. Or two, you do think they're calling for help, but they're maybe not even calling for help. So Arya, I think, is kind of completely right. Arya begins moving silently through the grass. As she approaches a village, the smell grows stronger, but it doesn't smell like rotten fish to her. It's worse. Foul stench that reminds her of dead bodies. And she is going to find these dead bodies, unfortunately, as the Mountain and his men are not the most nice people, I should say. She moves cautiously, using the undergrowth to stay hidden, and after a few stops to listen, she hears horses and a man's voice, further confirming her suspicion. Another thing to think about here is, they're going in at nighttime. Arya is so small that it's going to be very easy to miss her, but somebody like Gendry, you think about how muscular, how big he is, it's going to be very difficult to miss someone like that moving around, especially when he has, heavier things on than Arya, like a helmet. The stench intensifies as she draws near a dense thicket of bramble on the outskirts of the village, where she hides and waits until sunset. As night begins to fall, so I was a little bit wrong on that. It's not night yet, but it's almost nighttime. As now night comes, Arya crawls to a gap in the bramble and finds herself near a gibbet by the waters of the God's Eye, where corpses hang. This is that bad smell. And you can just tell these men, if you're Arya, you're maybe thinking maybe these are still more of Lorch's men, but they are the Mountain's men specifically. And this is just what they've been doing. They've going from place to place, doing war crimes and terrorizing the Riverlands. She sees the gruesome sight of dead men dangling by chains, picked at by crows, and notices their bodies being ravaged by something larger than birds. Arya forces herself to look at each corpse, telling herself to be tough as she realizes they've been stripped of their flesh before being hanged. A brutal way to go out. And Arya having to see these things and experience these things at such a young age proves really her courage, right? How many people could imagine seeing things like that at her young age? Among the bodies, she finds one corpse reduced to a single leg, swinging in the wind with its face and eyes devoured by the crows. As we get into page 228, Arya feels fear but pushes it aside, knowing dead men can't harm her, though the killers could. If you're thinking about this going, yeah, if they did that to these guys, what are they going to do to me if they find me? It's going to build your fear more than anything, and that's probably what the Mountain wants. He wants anybody approaching to realize how brutal these men are, to put that fear into them before a potential fight could even break out. She notices two men in mail standing guard in front of a low building with a slate roof by the water and tall poles with banners, one red and the other pale, possibly white or yellow. Now, Arya can't really tell exactly who these banners are. She assumes that the red one, at least, is a Lannister banner, but she's not sure on the yellow one. She's going to get a better look a little bit later on, but she's not sure, who exactly these men are. But given the bodies, it would assume it's the Lannister men. A shout rings out, and a third man appears, pushing a prisoner forward. As Arya sees this prisoner's steel helm and horns, she realizes that it is Gendry. Of course, Gendry gets caught. He's not the most stealthy guy in the world for all the reasons we've talked about in this chapter. And now you're in a tricky spot for Arya, right? The same conversation Arya just had with Gendry is going to be playing in her mind now. Should she leave Gendry behind? What hope does she have of freeing him when there's all these men that have, mail and they have swords and they're armored and skilled? How does she sneak in and try to free Gendry? It seems an impossible task. She even thinks if Gendry had listened to her, he wouldn't be in the situation. If Arya had gone alone, it would have been much safer. The guards speak loudly, but Arya can't hear them over the crows. One of the spearmen strikes Gendry in the face with his spear, knocking him down, while another guard kicks him. Afterward, the guards drag Gendry to the storehouse. A small boy tries to dart out, but is thrown back inside by one of the guards. Arya hears crying and a scream so painful that it makes her wince. They're taking a lot of prisoners, especially for people that they don't think are a threat. And they're probably not treating them well, right? Gendry just got beat the crap out of. Again, it's part of that fear aspect that Arya has to be feeling. The guards lock Gendry inside the storehouse with the boy. As the wind stirs the banners, Arya sees the golden lion on one of the poles, confirming her fears that Lannisters are involved. Now, what I think is great here is we just got done talking about in the last chapter with Sansa all about the lore of the Clegane sigil and their house. And here we are where we get another mystery where George kind of tests if you were paying attention last chapter, because he brings up the exact sigil once again to Arya, and Arya does not know who this sigil belongs to. It's familiar, she doesn't know who. She notices the banner of the 3 dogs running across a yellow field. It reminded Arya of dogs she'd seen before, but she can't recall from where. The guards continue their actions, with one of them taking off his helm and wearing Gendry's instead, which angers Arya, though she cannot stop him at all. Also, Gendry's helm is really finely made. Even Ned compliments it in book 1, and you got to think a lot of these men are getting, mail that's not really all that great work. It's just probably mediocre work for these regular old soldiers. So getting a helm like that is going to be really rare. And you're going to be thinking, if you're one of these soldiers, where did Gendry get a helmet like this? You wouldn't find this in every other village. This would have to be something crafted from a very high-tier person. It's even maybe one of the reasons that Gendry's allowed to live, right? If he has this kind of skill, he'd be very useful. She hears muffled screams from inside the storehouse, unsure if it's Gendry or the boy, or maybe even others. As we get into page 229, Arya watches the guards change shifts and sees various activities around the area. Men leading horses to drink, and a hunting party returning with a deer carcass. The everyday stuff of a camp of men, during their raids. The men clean the deer, cook it, and the smell of meat mixes with the foul stench of decay, making Arya's stomach churn. As the deer is cooked, men wearing bits of armor emerge from the houses. The choicest portions of meat are taken to one of the houses specifically. Arya considers using the cover of darkness to free Gendry, but sees the guards light torches from the cook fire. A squire brings food and wine to the guards, who then drink and pass the skin around before the others leave, leaving only 2 guards at the storehouse. So Arya sees her opportunity. There's 2 guards here. She's going to have to take them out, or at least distract them somehow, to get Gendry out. How is that going to happen? Very difficult thing to do, especially when they're lighting torches around. It's not as easy as just sneaking up directly to them, because there is light available to these men. After waiting for a while, Arya's stiff from staying still too long and finally sneaks away through the trees. With the sounds of the God's Eye and the wind in the branches around her, the howling of wolves can be heard in the distance. Arya surprises Lamy and Hot Pie, who are startled when she steps out of the trees. Hot Pie, relieved, tells her they thought she had abandoned them. And again, they've been gone for a good amount of time, right? They left just before night started. She's probably very deep into the night now at this point. If you're Lamy and Hot Pie, I would be getting very anxious. But now is the real question. If you're Lamy, Hot Pie, Arya, what do you do? How would you even possibly get Gendry out alive, right? Because Lamy is useless. Hot Pie has shown no ability to fight or even sneak at all. How are they going to take on 2 full-grown men and with actual weapons and armor? It just doesn't seem feasible. Lamy asks about Gendry, and Arya quietly reveals that he's been captured. She urges them to help her free him by killing the guards, though Hot Pie is scared by the idea of facing 20 men. I can't blame him. And if you want me to be completely honest, even though you know where Arya's coming from, she's very empathetic. She wants to save her friend. If Arya wanted to get out of this maybe alive, or being able to go, survive not being somebody else's capture, her best bet is just to leave everybody. She can't help Hot Pie and Lamy, especially now with Gendry gone. Nobody's going to be able to really carry Lamy. You're in a really bad spot. Arya tries to reassure Hot Pie that they only need to fight 2 guards and they'll escape with Gendry. Lamy, always wanting to yield, suggests to yield to them, but Arya refuses, determined not to leave Gendry behind. Lamy tries to persuade her to abandon Gendry, arguing they could hide and wait for the guards to leave, since the captors don't know the rest of them are there. Now, I will counter. if they started torturing Gendry, at what point would he maybe reveal that they're there? Or would he die before he did? Something that they don't know, but it should be a question in their minds. Arya stubbornly shakes her head, refusing to abandon her friend. As we get into page 230, Arya angrily chastises Lamy for his suggestion to leave Gendry, insisting that they'll all die if they don't rescue him. She argues that Gendry was the strong one. Without him, they won't survive. Which is at least very much true for Lamy, right? Lamy will die if Gendry is not recovered. So it's kind of funny that the person that is most for leaving Gendry behind is also the one that will die the quickest, if not for Gendry. She asks Hot Pie if he's coming with her, and after a moment of hesitation and a glance at Lamy, he agrees, but says Lamy should stay behind with Weasel. Lamy worries about wolves. Again, he is injured, right? And how is he going to defend against wolves? Not really going to. But Arya suggests yielding to them if necessary, which is hilarious. Arya and Hot Pie struggle to navigate back to the village, with Hot Pie stumbling and getting lost in the dark, foreshadowing of what is to come because Hot Pie fails every stealth check imaginable. If he was playing D&D, he basically has heavy armor on. He's really struggling, as Arya even has to double back several times to help him. Once they spot the faint glow of the village fires, Arya warns Hot Pie about the hanging dead men and reminds him that fear cuts deeper than swords. They must move quietly and slowly. Now, for Arya, this works. She's somebody very courageous, and she's willing to try and help Gendry, even if it means her capture or death. Hot Pie is not that brave. Arya leads Hot Pie, and he emerges scratched and bleeding, but they proceed silently along the gibbet of hanging corpses. As they crawl, a crow lands on Hot Pie's back, causing him to gasp, and a voice from the dark suddenly demands to know who's there. Instantly, Hot Pie just ruins everything. He instantly makes a noise. People know he's there. Remember, we're in the middle of night, and yes, there are, natural sounds like birds and the trees, moving and whatever's going on in this camp. But it's not like, I feel like, modern day now, where there's a lot more noises during the nighttime, especially if you're in a populated area, a town, a city, or whatever. Here, I feel like even the slightest of sounds you're going to hear much easily than you would, like, even nowadays, right? You think about cars going by or stuff like that could mask very soft sounds. Not here, not in this time period. Hot Pie instantly panics and shouts, "I yield," throwing away his sword. Arya tries to pull him back, but it's too late. He runs forward, repeating his surrender. Arya is not going to give up so easily as she draws a needle and prepares to fight. But the men quickly surround her as she slashes at the nearest one, but he blocks her with an armored arm. Another man knocks her to the ground, and a third disarms her. As she tries to bite, her teeth hit cold chainmail. The values of armor, they can protect you from some of these little things that most people aren't going to have. Again, most small folk, peasants, are not going to have the ability to get through like really good armor, which a lot of the Lannister men will probably have. And so that's the unfortunate part for Arya. But the man then pushes Arya and knocks her out. When she lies on the ground in pain, she overhears the men talking, but she can't make out their words due to the ringing in her ears. When she attempts to crawl away, the earth seems to shift beneath her, and they take Needle. This is a huge moment for Arya. She loses that tie, to Syrio, to her father, to Jon. It's a really big moment for Arya, and kind of going into this next identity where, we talk about her losing her identity of, herself when she goes to the Faceless Men, but in a lot of ways, Book 2 is almost about kind of getting rid of the Arya Stark persona. It's almost like that training for what is to come for her later on. And this is kind of that first part of it, right? Losing Needle. She feels more shame over what she has lost than even the physical injuries that she's going through, as that gets us into page 231, the last of the chapter. Arya's roughly pulled to her knees by someone gripping her jerkin. She sees Hot Pie kneeling before a giant man, who Arya instantly remembers the hands turning where Sansa had told her about the mountain and his enormous size. She kind of feels dumb in this moment that she didn't realize that this sigil was the Clegane's. Arya feels detached, almost emotionless, and barely aware of her surroundings as the mountain orders them to lead them to the others. She and Hot Pie are escorted past the gibbet of dead men, while Hot Pie pleads for mercy, offering to bake pies for their captors. Unfortunately, Hot Pie, at least in terms of this camp, there's not going to be a lot of supplies to make bread, but at Harrenhal, he is going to have a fairly good job. 4 men then accompany them, one holding a torch, another a long sword, and 2 armed with spears. They find Lamy where they left him, and he immediately surrenders, of course. He claims that the girl had ran as soon as they had heard them coming. The man with the torch asks if Lamy is the last, and Lamy confirms the girl Weasel ran away, as Arya silently hopes Weasel can escape and never return. Hopefully, but a girl on her own with no survivable skills at all, not likely, unfortunately. But again, it's interesting that Lamy has been pleading about, we need to do this yielding, and you see him do that instantly. He follows his own advice, and we see how that goes. The guards ask Lamy for information about a person named Dondarrion, promising a meal in return, but Lamy doesn't know anything about a Dondarrion. One of the spearmen grows frustrated and questions Lamy about his leg, noting it looks injured. Lamy admits he can't walk and asks to be carried. Now, one thing I will say, if you are these soldiers, now they are brutal, absolutely horrible people. I would definitely feel their annoyance if I'm just like chilling at camp and some people just like roll up, like just trying to sneak into our camp. I would be annoyed, and then I have to follow them out into the forest. Like, I can't hate on that much of it, but the actions that they commit, not good. The spearman then casually stabs Lamy in the throat with his spear, almost like this was nothing, right? That this was just some casual, everyday thing. It killed him instantly, spraying blood from the wound, and the man mocks Lamy's request, making a callous remark as he pulls the spear out. That's how Arya 5 ends. Arya's storyline's been quite depressing. This chapter, Lamy dies. Now, he's not the most likable character in the world, but he's still a kid. He's still a boy. You have Yoren die in the last chapter, going through all these war crimes and building up the tension, hearing screams at night. Another solid Arya chapter, kind of transporting us to the next phase of her arc, the Harrenhal arc. But thank you guys all for watching. Again, feel free to subscribe and like if you want to see more of these rereads. They will be posted every Tuesday at 7 p.m. U.S. Central Time. And yeah, I hope you all enjoy, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.